Hi, I'm Leanpub from Leanpub, and in this episode of the Leanpub podcast, I'll be interviewing Max Guernsey. Based in Las Vegas, Max is a seasoned veteran of the software industry with nearly 3 decades of experience in a wide variety of technologies and domains, and co-founder of Producor, a business and software development consultancy. You can follow him on LinkedIn at Max Guernsey III. Along with his colleague Luniel De Beer, Max is the co-author of the Leanpub book, Ready: Why Most Software Projects Fail and How to Fix It. In the book, Max and Luniel introduce RMF, Requirements Maturation Flow, a practical and deeply structured approach to aligning product and engineering without replacing your existing process. Whether you're using Scrum, Kanban, or something custom, RMF helps you stabilize scope, eliminate carryover, and deliver what actually matters. In this interview, we're going to talk about Max's background and career, professional interests, the book, and at the end, we'll talk a little bit about his experience writing and self-publishing a book this time. So thank you very much, Max, for being on the Leanpub podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I always like to start these interviews by asking people for their origin story. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, where you grew up and how you found yourself interested in technology and building the career for yourself that you have.
Well, I grew up in the Northwest, and I was a second generation engineer, second generation developer. So I was exposed to it from a young age, and I just started getting interested in it. I don't know. I don't really know how young I was, but I started getting interested in it when I was very young, and just kind of got more and more into it, and then ultimately joined the professional world after a brief flirtation with college.
Oh, okay.
Uh, so, I had an opportunity for an internship at a little company, not that little, called Rogue Wave Software, which was in the same town as the college where I was going. And I did the internship, and I was like, I think I like this a lot more than school. So that's when I made my jump.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So I saw from LinkedIn you studied math and physics, but obviously you were already, so I imagine that first job was in like software development or software.
Yeah, it was exactly because it was
You already like
already understood
those things.
Yeah, yeah.
How did you do that? Did you study it in high school? Did you have your own projects, things like that?
Yeah, I had my own projects. I wouldn't say I studied it in high school. If anything, I taught it in high school.
Okay.
It was a very small, um, very experimental, and not very well run high school. And so I was um, there was a math teacher for that high school, but not like a computer programming teacher. And so like I got math credits for teaching other students a programming course, for instance.
That's really fascinating. I actually always like to go into the details of sort of educational experiences if people want to talk about them a little bit. One thing, so for just in my experience, when I was in grade 12, I didn't have space given all the courses I wanted to actually take calculus. Um,
Hmm.
so I just sort of like I was a good enough student that I convinced the calculus teacher, can I just write the exams,
Hmm.
the weekly exams? And there's take calculus that way. And so I sort of like I had a friend who was very, very smart, ended up in nuclear engineering, physics kind of stuff. But who would help me. But basically, yeah, that was a kind of more or less just independent course of study. Did you find that doing that kind of thing came to you naturally? Sounds like it did.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been more of, in terms of learning, I've always been someone who prefers to learn by doing. So there was a bunch of friction there as a child of my dad was like, no, this is how you do it. And you got to learn this before you learn this. And that wasn't me. I was more like, no, I'm just going to sit in front of a keyboard and try something and then try something else and figure out what works and what doesn't. And so it was very natural for me to to learn on my own, to study on my own, and school, I would say, is was very unnatural for me. Any form of school never really. There was never much compatibility there. My last year of school, uh, my senior year of high school, as it were, I did not want to go, and I had done a really good job of convincing the administration of that school that they also did not want me to go by that point. So I said, look, this is the deal I'm proposing. Option one is I keep coming and I keep making everybody's life miserable. Option two is I I don't show up. I show up at the end of each quarter to turn in my quarterly project, and then we don't see each other otherwise. And so that's kind of how I did high school. Very similar to like a macrocosm of your calculus story. I was like, I just wanted to do these things and more or less not interface with school. So maybe a different motivation, but a similar execution.
And was it the I'm just curious about what it was about school that just didn't match with you. Was it the kind of like hierarchical nature of it? Was it the fact that things are being structured for you so much? Was it having to like, just go to school? I hate
Well, it's gonna sound. I mean, it's fine. So, um, every year in school, and this is actually what drove me out of college as well. Every year, I got the same story. After they figured out that I was different. I know you're bored today. I know you're bored this year.
Mm,
Just wait until middle school. That's when it gets interesting.
mm,
Well, I know you're bored in middle school, but at high school, that's when it picks up. In high school, hey, I know you're bored now, but when you get to college, that's when it really is going to get interesting. I got to college, I got real bored, and I walked into the counselor's office, and she goes, Max, I know you're bored in your undergrad. And I said, I'm going to stop you right there. I have heard this lie every year of my life so far, and I don't care to hear it again. So I just had very little to gain from it. I had parents that taught me a lot. So you know, I already knew how to read. I already knew how to write. I didn't get much out of that. So I was just sitting there like, okay, now I got to listen to this again. And then it just wasn't for me. That makes sense.
yep. No, that totally makes sense. And so then you jumped into, the kind of corporate world,
Mhm.
maybe sooner than other people would. Um, were you, and I guess you said you did an internship before kind of joining, but like, did you find that interesting or did you jump immediately into something else?
No, I jumped in. Well, it was internship was their code word for recruiting people out of college, right? So it wasn't like an unpaid internship. It was actually a fairly high paying internship that was like what you would pay an entry level developer, but it got them past the gatekeepers at the college recruiting thing. So yeah, I mean, it basically jumped straight into professional programming. At that time, I was in the support organization, right? Because I was just getting started, but it was support for a C++ class library that was shipped as code and compiled on the customer's, systems. So
Mhm.
still a coding job. And then yeah, I just kind of evolved it from there. Went and got other gigs and kind of climbed up into um, places where it was more having an effect on what the system did instead of in a support organization. And that really was the only job where I was in a support organization. I don't know if I answered that question.
Yeah, no, you did, and did you find yourself kind of in very high functioning teams, kind of, or
I did.
organization?
That was I did not realize it at the time.
Yeah.
So the Northwest in the late 90s and the early aughts was already rarefied, extremely rarefied. I did not understand this. And also, um, actually wrote a blog about this. Also, I think just like the size of the software industry now means that regression towards the mean is a necessity. Like to have a million developers, some of them can't be the kind of people that I was working with at the turn of the century. So yeah, I worked on extremely high functioning teams. The highest functioning team I ever worked on was in Bend, Oregon, actually, way out in the Tules by a lot of people's standards. Moved out there, worked with that crowd. By that time, I had enough experience to realize that they were way up there on the scale, but my scale was still not properly adjusted. I still had at that time only worked with the top like 5% type teams.
So I've got a couple of specific questions I'd like to ask about that in a minute, but was this I'm looking at LinkedIn, so this is public, but that was for Dassault. I noticed you worked for them. Was
Mhm.
the group in Bend, Oregon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Are
it
there
started out.
military aircraft and stuff like that?
No. So,
Oh.
well, Dassault was military aircraft, but that was not Dassault when I worked there.
Ah,
So
okay.
it was, it's not necessarily any better though. It was software for pharma companies to keep track of their scientists who are paid ungodly amounts, even by software development standards. I mean, those scientists are paid Well, I mean, they got to wash their hands before they go to the bathroom. So I guess that's some of it, right? But you know, they want to make sure they have this paper trail that says, no, this guy invented this drug that bonds to this target here, and he was paid a seven-figure salary to do it, and he cannot go take that and start his own company with it now. So that's the kind of software that they built. It was a company called, I mean, it went by so many names. There were so many mergers and acquisitions. When I was hired, it was called Symix,
Oh,
and then it merged with another company. It's called Acceleris. Then that got bought by Dassault. And if you look in Dassault, you'll see Biovia is the group that became, and that's the part that I worked in.
okay, okay. It's
I worked for Dassault for like 2 days.
okay. It's funny. The reason that we did a launch video for the book before doing this interview. So I think this is how I sort of picked up on this. But I had a similar experience in a different domain when I finished a doctorate and then I got a job as an investment banker doing mergers and acquisitions in London. And I did not know that I was basically on the top kind of infrastructure team, basically for M&A, maybe in the world at
Mm-hmm.
the time. And it was partly because infrastructure kind of M&A kind of was relatively um, it was not sexy. Uh,
Right.
so even though I wasn't at a sort of sexy kind of bank, it was probably the top team and just like brilliant people. And I just didn't know that
Right.
that's what I was experiencing. And so one thing that like of course, the way I then learned that I'd been operating at that level was only when I went out into the world kind of after I was finished it, or when we interacted with teams for other banks and stuff like that. And I kind of realized, oh, like there's actually something very special about what I've learned here. So without like intending to, I was actually operating in my field at like a very, I wasn't by the best on my team by any means, but like I was by default kind of operating at a very high level.
Right. And if it's your first team, or in my case, first several teams,
Mhm.
you get spoiled. You get at least I got a really weird view of what being able to work with a team is. What I got was a view of what being able to work with a good team could be, and I confused that because of my arrogance and youth with what it should be, or what it is, right? And so then you start getting out there and you start running into these other organizations, and my first response was, well, who are these clowns? Right? Like why do I suddenly have to go to the clown show? And up to this point I've been working with all these other people who are confident, not realizing that they weren't just competent, they were like almost superlatively competent,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a strange experience to learn that,
Mhm.
especially when you didn't seek it yourself. So if it sounds like there's a little bit of boasting going on here, that's an element of it, on both of our parts, I'm saying, but you if you stumble into it without knowing that's what's happening, it's not a kind of prideful experience. It actually can turn into frustration more than
Oh yeah.
and realizing that, like, as much as you're elite, like, actually you were so there was one big thing you missed, which was what the normal state of affairs is. Um,
There.
and that can be very disorienting. I remember when I sort of left that job, my sort of going away thing, I remember my sort of, boss saying, like, "The one thing I would really miss about this is being around smart people all the time."
Mhm.
I was very naive. I was like, "I know plenty of smart people. What are you talking about?" And it was like it wasn't exactly kinda like smart's just a kind of catch-all word anyway, but it was like the kind of people where if they'd been at work for 24 hours and then 10 more hours worth of work came up, they didn't bat an eye or like they just sort of internally resourced themselves to do the next 10 hours that they now suddenly needed to do. And that was just taken for granted. It wasn't like seen as like a big deal. That was,
Right.
"Oh, now I just need to reset my expectations for what the next 10 hours are gonna be like. I thought I was gonna be going home and sleeping. Instead, I'm gonna be here doing this. I better pace myself this way so I can, blah, blah, blah." But, like, all that kind of on the fly kind of stuff, I just took for granted that people were like that they could, in a sense, kind of handle well anything you threw at them. And that's actually like a big mistake when it comes to working with kind of teams. And I don't mean it like, yeah, like you're trying to say, not like some derogatory sense of ordinary, just like, no, 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 that's just, it's a mistake to think that everyone wants to or can operate like that.
Yeah. I have no qualms. being interpreted as someone who believes there's a bell curve. I don't I don't mind saying, there's an ordinary in our industry, there's a below ordinary, there's an above ordinary. There always has been, and I believe that maybe the bell curve has shifted because of recruiting pressure for, organizations needing 250,000 engineers or whatever, right? I mean, there's too much demand and there's not enough supply to cherry pick the way they did at the turn of the century. They just couldn't.
I promised some details. So now that we've both
Yes.
been here saying this, so let's put it on the table. So what is like, an elite kind of software developer or software engineer? Like what are some of the characteristics that you would immediately recognize? Oh, this is a person just operates at that level.
I mean, I'm sure this will be unpopular, but I think intelligence is the number one trait, right? There are when I think back to the teams that I was on, the ones before I realized what was going on, and then that one that was kind of after I realized what was going on, and I recognized how lucky I was. Um, that's the that is the one overriding property I see is that most of the team, uh, the team's bell curve was way to the right of the industry's bell curve in terms of just their ability to dissect a problem, break a problem down, find the concepts that need to vary and encapsulate them. The skills is also a thing, right? But the thing is, you can take a an extremely intelligent developer who's never heard of like design patterns, for instance, right? And you can explain to him quickly the value of, for instance, encapsulating variation. And then after that, he's upgraded as a developer, right? Now he may have to practice it a little. He might have to play with it and experiment and find when it matters and when it doesn't. And in that regard, if you were the mentor and he the student, he might still kind of be behind you, but his uptake is so fast and um the the problems we deal with today are so complicated that um as someone kind of moves left on the bell curve, I think it gets increasingly challenging to start to address those things. And yet, ironically, those are exactly the techniques that you need in order to keep a code base clean enough that someone doesn't need 2 or 3 units of standard deviation above the mean to comprehend it, right? So, but then there's all these challenges in getting them to understand the forces involved and why it's worth picking up in the first place, and the pickup takes longer. So yeah, I mean, you know, we'll see how that one plays, but that's my view.
That's a very good and very straightforward answer. Another thing I found working on kind of an elite team was that there was it's kind of like you took it for granted that what the everyone else was doing was smart. And so if you saw them doing something you didn't expect, you didn't jump in and interrupt the process and go, "What's this?" You thought to yourself, "Oh, what's why is this person doing this? They must understand something or have come to some conclusion that I don't understand or haven't come to myself yet." And when you do that by default, it doesn't mean it's always true. Sometimes they might be making a mistake. But if by default you're just thinking, "Oh, what if they figured they're really smart. They're doing something differently than I would expect. What could that mean that's good rather like an improvement as it were rather than a mistake?" You're always then operating at your top level, um, and not second guessing or anything like that. That way you can just kind of everybody can be operating at their best all the time. And that was kind of like partly they think what my boss was getting at when he was saying like, "Not I'm gonna miss being around smart people." It's not so much the insights or whatever that they're going to give you, it's being able to take for granted that they're operating at this high level and how that naturally elevates you as well.
That's a good point. That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
And another thing, maybe more directly, another thing about an elite team is probably has to be operating in an elite environment. And that if the environment isn't kind of elite or very, very kind of good and highly functional, maybe even the great developer won't be able to function as one. Um,
Yeah.
if that's
Yep.
and what would an example of like an environment be? Would it be like everybody's got like great equipment, everybody's got lots of leeway to decide what they want to do with their day, for example?
I think probably number one would be that people are wasting their time.
Mm.
Should I start that over so that I don't cough in the middle?
No, no.
Um, so we got all these fires going on, so I'm coughing a little bit. But yeah, their time isn't being wasted. Their time isn't being wasted, and their ability to make good decisions isn't being overridden. Those are probably the big things that I see. So in an environment that um doesn't take advantage of the eliteness of its team members, you see a lot of wasted effort, a lot of asking people to build the wrong thing, a lot of asking people just to build something so that they're busy when you don't really even know what you want. Um, a lot of not paying attention to feedback when they say, we really need to go solve this problem or it's going to have this consequence down the line. If you have an environment full of seed corn eaters, right, then they don't care about down the line. Down the line is that doesn't exist. The now is what exists. And so now they're hungry and they see corn and they want to eat it. They don't care if that was supposed to be sown for next year's crops. You see, and then that goes circles back into wasting people's time. That causes things to be late. That makes the seed corn eaters angry because they're not getting what they want or what they paid for. And so then they start cracking the whip to go faster, but all the things they want faster are are superficial. They're not attending to the underlying factors that matter, the infrastructure, the design, all of that stuff.
Mhm.
And so they just keep making things worse for themselves and for the developers. And you're probably right that the really elite people eventually get tired of it and leave. But I've also seen some really, really highly skilled people stay in environments like that for surprisingly long amounts of time, like 5 years longer than you would expect, 10 years longer than you would expect. Yeah.
And presumably that would be for that this is my job, this is locked in, this is this is how I make my living, this is I've got family and other obligations and stuff like that. So you just
Yeah.
very human thing to just kind of eat it. Um,
But on the other hand, we're talking about people who, in most economies, they could just go get another job. I'm not saying I would expect them to just walk, like, you know, throw their hat down and walk out in the middle of anything. But people do go get other jobs and they don't. They stay.
mm,
And it's weird because they're like they stay and they get abused and abused and abused and abused. And then occasionally they'll say, I hate being abused like this. These people are making things hard for me. I wish they wouldn't. And then they'll stay. Well,
mhm,
it's a very strange dynamic
mhm.
to observe.
Yeah, just moving on. Now that we've talked about you and your life and we get to know your personality a little bit, moving on to the next part of the interview, we'll be talking about the book just in a moment. But
Mhm,
before that, so you co-authored this book with your co-founder at Product Core.
mhm.
Uh, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you and Luniel met and how you ended up in this business and co-authoring kind of arrangement.
So we met way back when, um, like 10 years ago. We were both working for a firm called Net Objectives. I don't know how many people remember that name at this point, but it wasn't like Eliason or McKinsey. It wasn't huge. It was a small, again, elite group of consultants built out of people with a lot of real life experience. And so by that time, he had already made his transition to product, and he and I met there working for one of their clients, who I won't name. Um, and then we occasionally we go our separate ways, and then we work with another client together, and then I left, and then a little later he left, and then we got together working for another even smaller consulting firm. Um, and then we kind of went our own separate ways, and then we decided to start a business together. And is that the too hand wavy an answer?
No, that's fine. It's always good starting at the same company, meeting that way, kind of
Yeah.
going around, but then sort of realizing you have something together is a really great story. And I've heard that from co-founders of things before and co-authors as well. Um, and so the book, uh, Ready: Why Most Software Projects Fail and How to Fix It, is informed by I think the same kind of spirit that informs the product core, which is that Muniel is very kind of like from, as you said, went into the product side of things, comes from, like lots of Scrum and kind of managing things from that level. And you come from the kind of software development, software engineering side of things.
Yeah.
Yes. Both bring this. And like, of course, that sort of merges quite well together when you're talking about managing teams that have both of these sides to things. And one thing I didn't, so I just finished actually recording our interview with Muniel for the podcast. So one thing I didn't ask him about, and I wanted to say for you, was the story of the bank that you tell at the beginning of the book. From that launch video we did, I got the impression that that was your tone of voice that was coming through in that story, maybe. Um,
Uh, yeah, my tone probably permeates the book,
mhm.
because I have a very strong tone sometimes. But yeah, it's what you want me to just tell the story.
Tell the story of the bank. Yeah, yeah.
All right. So this place, um, this place was struggling to deliver, like really struggling to deliver. They were a kind of an infrastructure bank, meaning part of our part of the United States national financial infrastructure. Um, the government was involved in some way, and like these regional banks that are underneath it owned it, and it's very convoluted, as many things in that area are. Anyway, it was contractually obligated to release a mobile app, and the basic function of this mobile app is to let clients make payments. Right? That sounds very simple, I think. Like I said it with very few words, so it seems like it should sound simple.
Mhm.
And of course, there's a lot more to collecting a payment, processing a payment, accounting for it, dealing with the interest. There's details, right, in getting it done, but a lot of that is handled in the back end. That's usually not handled in the mobile app, right? The mobile app has a fairly small number of things that you need to do. Um, Now, a big bank like Bank of America or whatever, they have a gigantic app with all kinds of features. That was not this bank. They wanted like make payments, look at your account, download your your transaction history for a period of time, right? Pretty simple thing. So when we were brought in, we were actually brought in by an intermediate consulting firm, um,
Mm.
who were people that we knew through another consulting gig, and they brought us in. And they brought us in, and they introed us, I guess I should say, because they had been hearing over and over from the teams that had been doing the delivery, that the real problem was the requirements. And so they thought, well, requirements, problem, and this team has some problems. So what they need is some people who can help them define better requirements and then figure out how to take those requirements and turn them into tests and kind of follow through to how they write the code. And that's us. That's, I mean, in their experience, that was us. So they brought us in to look at this. And when we kind of got in, they said, hey, by the way, I just want you to know, it's been 3 years. They haven't shipped anything. Now, if you went to the bank, if you figured out who the bank was, and you went to the bank and you asked different people, you would get different answers about whether or not that was true. But the fundamental facts that the project, the like 6 month project to build this thing, had been open for 3 years and that nothing had been shipped to production, those were definitely true. Those were observably true to us. And then there was some bickering about like, yeah, but we've shipped to our our pre-testing environment once or twice. So it's really only been 2 years, and it's
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but it was 2 years without shipping anything in the 2020s is still just outrageous, right? So as is the case with some banks, obviously not the M&A bank you worked for. That sounds cool.
Mm-hmm.
Some banks, there's kind of this um, malaise that comes from the fact that they've chosen a line of business where physics is already on their side. I've also noticed that in insurance, right? I mean, insurance, casinos, banks. I don't want to say you just have to turn the lights on,
I
but
know exactly what you mean.
it's not too much more than that, and you can still be profitable. And then they go, well, if we don't know what we're doing, why are we making a profit? And I'm like, well, because the people who are borrowing from you know even less about what they're doing. Anyway, so sorry, that's neither here nor there. That's a huge digression.
I could talk about that for a long time. So thanks for putting it so well. But yeah.
So the point is that this team had not delivered anything, and pointed. Everybody pointed at someone else. One group says the team doesn't know how to execute. One group says product doesn't know how to tell us what we want. One group says, you know, it's it's this leader's fault, and then that leader says, no, it's this leader's fault. Everybody points somewhere else at someone else, which is also pretty common in certain kinds of environments. Um, the weird thing is that, with maybe one exception I can think of, whom I can't name, but he knows who he is, that was all mostly true. Like the team couldn't execute, and product wasn't telling them what to execute on if they could. And there were some leaders who were doing some really ineffective things. But addressing any of those didn't help at all. Like to put it in context, it's pretty obvious that like you said, I'm the technical one, right? So one of the first things they said was, we don't think that the team can execute. We want you to go review their code
Right.
and tell us what you think about the code.
Mm-hmm.
So I went and reviewed the code and like, give me the eye bleach. There were things like the same simple method copied, I don't know, 50, 60 times. I can't remember what number I put in the book. I think it was about half the actual
count was like 97 or something.
Yeah, so I think 97 was the actual maximum, if I recall correctly. I have it written down. I can go look it up. But you know, it was huge amounts of redundancy and not like the kind that you get from, oh, one more bad decision, one more bad decision, one more bad decision. The kind you get from people who kind of just don't know how to program, right? Um, and so I issued this report, and the report was even more clinical than what I'm saying now. I don't think I'm being too scathing, but that report was just, here's this, here's this, here's this. This is what you should do. This is what you should do. This is what you should do. One of the pieces of advice that I said was, if you have the same logic that you need to use over and over, you should put it in a function and call it. And the response that I got from the team was not, oh, well, thanks for the advice, everybody knows that, or whatever you expect. The response was like I'd blown their mind by giving them this nugget of advice from the 1970s, right?
Yeah, so I can actually just to jump in there to giving it an example that people who aren't programmers might get. So when I read that, I was struck by one thing I learned in financial modeling, which is mostly Excel, which I much later learned was a kind of programming. But if there's an assumption, like say the price of a product, you manually type that in one place in the model. You don't type it in many different places.
And certainly not 97.
Not 97. And the one of the reasons is, if you ever need to change it, you only need to change it in one place, and it's guaranteed to have the flow through effects on everything else, everywhere it needs to happen.
Yeah.
So if you have that input in more than one place, what's going to happen is you're going to have to change it in more than one place, which means when it changes, someone's going to have to know, oh, that's also over here. Oh, that's also over there. It won't be documented the 97 places where this needs to be changed. You're just relying on people knowing where that change needs to take place. And I say all this because, like, if you it's surprising when my version of what the experience you're talking about is like coming across some like accountants or business process management people who haven't been properly trained in financial modeling, and they'll have those same assumption typed in a number, or even like within the formula, hard coded in the formula itself somewhere. And when you explain, you know what, if you just put this in one place once and refer to it wherever else you need to refer to that assumption, you'll just be so like all these problems that you're running into all the time will be solved. And exactly like you say, it's like boom, like the scales fall from their eyes, and they're like, oh,
Yeah.
and it's great to see that problem solved. But it is also frustrating if like you come into this having known that what seems like an obvious right way to do things to begin with.
Yeah. The sort of thing that I would have expected them to have taught in college if I'd stayed to find out. Uh, um, yeah, exactly. And it was very surprising. Thank you for that. I'm a coder. I'm talking to a coder. I forgot about the fact that the audience might not all be coders. Yeah. So that was just one example of where things were at in terms of individual contributions, and I don't mean that just like individual contributors, but like where each individual's skills laid or were laying, where they lied. I don't know. Anyway, where they were. Um, and we made changes to all of those. We brought BDD in. They did actually follow some of my coding advice and started writing better code. They started writing better tests. They started doing all of these things that are like point skills. Do this better, do that better. And it just didn't move the needle. It just wouldn't get anything going, right? We'd still go through a sprint, and then at the end of the sprint, we'd have a bunch of work items that would all get rubber stamped as done, but nobody could really explain how the product had changed or how that moved the organization towards its goal of releasing this by by modern standards simple app with fairly simple functionality. So that's the backstory.
Yeah.
And then did we to go into the then what happened, or
Yeah, definitely. But just before I do that, but just before you do that, um, there's a really great section, and this is all happening in kind of the first chapter of your book where you talk about a process of elimination. Um, and you said, there was a point at which you could throw up your hands and say, this is all hopeless. And you have a list of any excuses you could have all the excuses you could have fallen back on. Like, this one, I think a lot of people who are, if there anyone listening who are programmers will, resonate with. The leadership is crushing the team with unrealistic expectations. Uh, there was a lot of, from what I understand from the story, there was people with the attitude that like, oh, if the engineers aren't busy doing features all the time and we're somehow screwing up, right? So we're going to just give them features to get them to work. Um, and then that gives you false kind of sense of accomplishment because all these features have delivered. One of the things that really struck me was when you talked about how, um, quoting from the book here, and nobody even talked about the bigger problem, the one so absurd it seems made up until you've lived it. The engineering teams had a habit of not understanding a requirement, building something random, and then demanding credit for having finished a work item. And then you talk about like it's a total disconnect. We tell them to do X, and they would do something completely different, and then tell you that's what you'd asked them for. And then there was also a very maybe more subtle thing where you also list the executives didn't appear to trust each other, and
yeah.
they didn't. So here you this a complex problem, and then so now you and Lineal had to go and get okay, like with all of these different moving parts, we're here in this situation. What can we do? So what did you do next?
Right. And there were parts that we couldn't fix, and parts that we could fix and didn't help when we did. So what we did next was cobble together little things that we'd done in pieces at other organizations in the past to build a coherent flow that would take the pressure off the team to get a lot done while I'm sorry, not take the pressure off the team to get a lot done. Take the pressure off the team to close a lot of work items. There's a big difference, right? And that's what was being tracked. So we took that pressure off of them. And at the same time, there was a pressure that should have been on them that never was, which was to get anything that product was asking for that they were actually requesting done. And that's why, as you kind of pointed out, right, every sprint they would close a bunch of work items and get nothing done. They just make some random changes and say that's what you asked for, and that was that. So we flipped it. We said, let's not worry about how much change they can make. Let's worry about making the changes they do make really the ones we want. And why are they making all of these changes? Well, they don't understand. It's clear they don't understand. Um, or on occasion, they do understand, but there's something in the way that they either didn't know was in the way or they knew was in the way and assumed they could get out of the way, or more likely just assumed they could just say it didn't matter because they weren't ever going to be held accountable. So we brought accountability into play about what was being built. We brought accountability into play about um, understanding what was being built, and we brought accountability into play about really figuring out what all the blockers are going to be. Now, we're not talking about the unforeseeable blockers. That still happens, of course. We don't have a crystal ball. I mean, maybe Lunio has a crystal ball. I don't know, but we don't know how to use it to predict the future in that way. If he does, but they the things that you do know are going to be a problem. Like every single sprint, we'd get to the end and we'd say, what's going on? Why are these work items? I kept saying stories because I hadn't gotten my education on Scrum from O'Neill yet. Why are these stories not? Why are they all almost done? Oh, they need to be tested. Well, why haven't any of them been tested? The testers need test data. And after a certain number of sprints, we were like, so you guys know in advance you need test data, right? Why are we waiting until the end of the sprint to start collecting that? So we started making them get that stuff they needed done, and it became apparent that really the single unifying force behind all of these mistakes, all of these problems, was the team starting implementation on a feature before they'd set themselves up for success. Setting themselves up for success meant knowing what it was they were going to build, knowing how they were going to validate it, knowing how they were going to get the test data, knowing that the database fields were, I mean, sometimes they would build code expecting a database field to be around and then it wasn't, knowing that some dependency service was going to actually be ready instead of just hoping, right? Because these teams did not have the design skills to do something like build a facade and mock out a dependency and leave a stub in place until the dependency is ready. And that was not happening. If that happened, it would have been because I like signed in and did it for them. That was not going to happen there, right? So for that team, for what they could do, a dependency being completely ready to work was part of finishing a task. And so we got them to stop trying to start the task until that was done, because what's the point? What's the point of building this thing almost all the way and then finding out that you've got a connection to something that doesn't exist and isn't going to exist for 9 more weeks, and you're gonna have to do more work to take the connection out because you don't have the skills to like feature switch it or mock it out or whatever, right?
Yeah, and that reminds me. I mean, one of the and not being a consultant myself, but like having interviewed many for the podcast and stuff like that. There's one thing. So you've now identified the problem, right? Which is like going through attacking it from various angles. It's like, oh, they're starting work on things which we call requirements. But it's like build this feature uh,
Mhm.
before they're ready to do that. And what ready means is what you and Luniel define in the book. You have a new process for doing this and things like that. Uh,
Mhm.
and I guess my question is, so one of the reasons this might sound all this is like this isn't the sort of genre of things. It's like, well, what's so hard about then implementing that within a team or a company or an institution, right? Now we figured this out. And part of the very specific problem here is that there's a lot of kind of managers are accustomed to kind of stonewallers who are like, no, 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 we can't get started on this until we've gone through every possible scenario of everything that could possibly go wrong,
Right.
things like that. And so, no, that's not what you're doing. But from a manager's perspective, who's had consultants come in maybe from various angles saying, what you need is more of us. You need more planning and stuff like that. You need
Right.
time spent in advance of getting to work. And this is where like the kind of one of the reasons this problem is so thorny is there's a kind of skepticism of being told to do, as it were, even more planning at the beginning. Um,
Well, that's right.
how do you go about when you're in? I mean, maybe there's an example from this story, but like showing, no, no, no. If you just spend a little bit more time getting people together, having a shared conversation and planning in advance, you're going to eliminate problems you don't even know that you have.
Yeah. So there's a couple things. One factor is there's probably an allergy to people saying that from consultants. The other place it comes from, though, is waterfall, right? Agility was a response in part to waterfall. It was this is how you make software projects work. But the reason it took off the way it did was that waterfall wasn't working. And the key element of waterfall is this idea that in any given phase, you have to do anything, everything, before you do anything from the next phase.
Mhm.
So the idea of waterfall is you get all of the requirements for your project, right? And then you do all of your analysis and then you do all of your design, right? And you build it like you're, building layers of a piece of physical infrastructure. Um, and so people are rightly allergic to anything that smacks of that. Um, the cure is to get them to understand that that is not what we're proposing. We're not proposing anything remotely like return to waterfall. You still scope your work items the same way. All we're saying is that you should, for each work item, before you start that work item, you should have it be ready. And then people go, okay, well, so maybe it's not waterfall, but it's still a bunch of planning. So then you say, okay, well that's true. It is we are pulling things forward, but we're not pulling forward work that didn't exist. We're not telling you, you should do this thing that you're not doing now. We're telling you should take this thing that you're doing and you're doing way too late
Mhm.
and you should
Yes.
forward
Yes.
so that all of the tasks after it can can benefit from it. In essence, what it really is an implementation, a real implementation, a meaningful implementation of the principle of value stream from lean thinking. That's really the main I mean, there's the whole like making sure they're next to each other. There's like the physical part of it too, but the fundamental part of value stream is making sure that things happen in the right order without intervening disruptions like big queues, big stashes of in the case of manufacturing, those big stashes of materials, that kind of thing. So that's what we're doing. We're saying, take this thing in your process that you're definitely doing. It's like test-driven development. That's what test-driven development is doing. They're saying, hey, you know you're going to do this. You know you're going to test your code. Why not write it down as an automated test? Why not do that at the beginning when you can use it as a concrete analysis artifact? And then you can benefit throughout the rest of your cycle from being able to run the test and more importantly, from being able to understand the problem from the perspective of having written the test. And we kind of leverage those sorts of hooks. There's already this idea of
Right.
take a thing that's happening too late and move it forward. And then we just make sure people understand we're not saying you should boil the ocean, you should go back to waterfall. We're saying for one work item, take a disciplined approach of making sure that that work item doesn't have any preventable, foreseeable roadblocks to success before you start coding on it.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way of explaining it, that you're doing it anyway, but if you do it up front, you can gain these massive benefits. And, I was just sort of reminded of a story a friend of mine told me. He and his wife had 4 kids of varying ages. And he said one thing they figured out after a while was the night before any school night, say, all the lunches are packed, all the clothes are laid out,
Mhm.
what's gonna be worn tomorrow morning, like, everything's all the sort of like the literal the backpacks have in the backpacks what they need to have in them. They're by the front door next to the shoes or the boots if you're in Saskatchewan, where my friend is from and stuff like that. And, and and he said, "It's not like morning wasn't chaos anyway, but because it's 4 kids and 2 parents and, blah, 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 there's all but with all that stuff that you were gonna have to do anyway, then in advance of the beginning of the day, you were much better prepared for anything that then came your way."
Right.
That might be kind of like a sort of like overly simplified example of it because it's just picking out one of the advantages, which is being able to deal with things going wrong. But if you're just prepared and you've thought through what's going to happen tomorrow, then there's all kinds of problems you won't run into that you took for granted. Like people shouting at each other, for example, where are my clothes? Uh,
Yeah.
that's not going to happen anymore. But also you're just much better prepared for, as you said, there's still going to be things that come up, that come out of the blue that you couldn't predict, but you're much better prepared for them and what they mean if you've got all this other stuff out of the way already that you're going to have to do.
Yeah, and the biggest example in my mind is actually not even disruptions, it's rework.
Right.
Uh, I mean,
Mm.
BDD tried, and to some extent, made some headway here. But the idea of agility is you, or not agility, but of being iterative is you build something and then you learn some stuff and then you refine what you built, right? And then you repeat that until you got what you need. The the counter argument to that is okay, but we don't need to spend any cycles on building something we knew we didn't need, right? We only need to spend cycles on building the thing that we thought was right but ended up not being right. Why do we have to waste cycles on building the wrong thing from the team not knowing what the product owner or whatever was requesting? That's just a huge waste of effort and time.
Mhm. Yeah. It's interesting. One thing I knew, this idea of having like a guaranteed conversation in advance or collaboration is so important. Particularly, there's a brief section that just sort of appealed to me, but about like how like all kinds of ambiguities are built into the English language as well. And like actually, this just people don't like to face that particular problem. It just kind of grates on them in some way. But like
Yeah.
having a shared understanding of what you're doing is a real achievement.
Yep.
And everybody has it when they then go off to carry out their tasks. They have a shared context for understanding where they are in the whole scheme of things. And without that, you crosstalk, which is a common problem. And you can get over that by just having shared terminology, shared understanding of what, say, for example, ready is, what done is, things like
Mhm.
that, that you go into great detail about in the book.
Yeah, I mean that's a great example, right? If it is work. It is work understanding what, even just what the other side thinks you mean, right? Like that's work.
Yeah.
And it takes time. And someone could look at a work item and say, "Hey, you said this wasn't going to cost anymore, but then these work items that I'm doing, they're taking twice as long as they were taking before." And you have to get them to realize, yeah, but you're only doing them once, right?
Mhm.
You're not doing them 6 times.
Mhm.
Yeah, it takes twice as long, but you're actually getting to working software in a third the time
Yeah.
because you take twice as long to get where you want to go the first time
Mhm.
instead of all these little steps that most of them don't even get you near where you're going.
So, what was the end of the story with the bank?
Oh yeah, the bank. So So we put that in place, and it actually did make a huge change. So they were stalled. They weren't getting anywhere. They weren't getting any closer to having released until we installed that. Even with the skills like the BDD, the TDD, to the extent they could do it, and the little design changes, requirements writing, none of that helped. But we put this in place, and all of a sudden, they weren't delivering 11 stories a sprint, none of which made it better, and maybe 9 of which might have even made it worse. Instead, like the first maybe 2 sprints, 3 sprints, there was some, I'll admit, some anger
Mm.
from the teams because they weren't getting credit for their hard work in their eyes. Because we said, this isn't what you agreed to do. This is not the thing that you agreed to do. You've got to do the thing that you said you agreed to do. And they said, well, but that's what we thought it meant. And we said, yeah, but that's how it works. We gave you a chance to say if you understood or not, and we dragged it out of you. We had managers there saying, you've got to speak up if you don't understand. You've got to speak up if you have questions. After about 2 sprints of them not getting credit, which I mean, the idea of crediting for completion of stories is silly anyway, but in their eyes, that was important. They slowed way the heck down. They stopped trying to chomp off so many work items, and they took, I think, maybe like in that third sprint, maybe two. Um, but they really invested in the second sprint ahead of the third sprint in truly understanding them and being ready, truly having everything in place, getting that test data that was just their bugaboo, right? Their bugbear or whatever it was that was just killing them, getting that stuff ready ahead of time. And that third sprint went astoundingly smoothly
Uh,
and produced a result that the stakeholders could understand as being a valuable move towards it. And that proceeded for a while we were there. And then we'd done our job. We'd gotten them unstuck. And so we went on our merry way. And then we found out a few months later that after 3 years of stall, when we installed that, a few months after that, they got it out there. They actually released it.
well, that's just a fantastic end to that story. That for anyone listening, I didn't know in advance of asking. That's great to hear that it ended that way. That's just awesome. Just moving on to the last part of the interview, where we talk a little bit about your experience as a writer. So I know you've published at least one book before.
In terms of actual books, I've published one book, um, and then I've published other content. I published something called a digital shortcut, which is like a half-length book or whatever, a quarter-length book.
The Manning thing.
No, Manning, and then I published what are called live projects from Manning. Those are kind of peers to how you set up courses here, right? But digital shortcut is like it was like an ebook before ebooks really were much of a thing. It was another Pearson thing, like my book was.
Okay. Okay. So I guess my question there would be, why did you and Luniel decide to self-publish this book so far? Um,
The um you can't beat the early phase, right? So my first book, I'm contractually obligated not to say anything disparaging about it, which is good which is okay because I still believe in the things that I wrote, but um, but I was not set up for success. I was given like the guy who was supposed to validate the ideas was like a PhD, right? It's like a PhD with like he really understood his stuff. He was like, oh, this is way ahead of its time. Uh, which is true. It ended up being the problem was way out of its time, and you needed to be a PhD to really appreciate it at the time. Um and now the kind of the market's been missed, so it's not like I'm going to come back and make a bunch of money off of it, or even sell it to into the market. But the thing that happened was once it finally got to the market, I really understood what the problem was. And I wanted a third of it to go away, and I wanted to add a third of it that would have appealed to the market a lot better. There's no way to do that. They said, well, if it had sold a bunch of copies, then we could do a second edition. I was like, well, if it had sold a bunch of copies, I wouldn't need to write a second edition.
right.
That wasn't an option.
Mhm.
Um, but it's almost like the waterfall thing, right? They nothing bad about them, but they print big, huge batches, and you got to get it right with that batch. But it's on you to find the feedback, and it's on you to do the iterative development and all of that. And I didn't know that it was my first book, right? And so then I was like, I know when I'm building the book, I need a way to cycle through. I need a way to give copies to people, have them tell me this works, this doesn't, this appeals, this doesn't, and change it. And I mean, the only two places I even know of where that's even remotely a possibility is here in the Pragmatic Press. The Pragmatic Press is kind of a closed club, and I still don't think that there's the openness to feedback, right? You got to get the people who are doing the feedback into the club too, if I understand correctly.
Right.
So here is just like we pay for our account that lets us integrate it with GitHub, and we put the stuff in there, and then we can show people the samples and get the feedback. We already made a little change to it based on feedback from one influencer who
Oh, fantastic.
reviewed the book, right? You just can't do that with traditional publishing. That's not to say that there's no place for traditional publishing, but that place is when you have if that place exists, it's when you have something that really is done, like really is baked, really is vetted, really is ready to go to market. But then when you have all that, it's like, why give them, like, they got to do a lot of marketing and make it worth cutting in the
Yeah,
cutting so deep, right?
exactly.
Uh, once you've done all the work yourself. So I don't know where it's going to go, but that's why is I wanted to be able to control it. I wanted to be able to get feedback on it and evolve it.
The last question I always like to ask on the podcast, if the guest has been using Leanpub and is a Leanpub author, is if there was one magical feature you could build for you, or if there's one thing that had you shaking your fist, going, "Damn you, Leanpub, why does this suck so much?" that we could fix for you. Can you think of anything that you would ask us to do that you haven't already asked us to do?
I asked you guys to do a lot of things.
Well, that were great bug reports. They were.
Shit.
uh,
Uh, I guess I mean the ability to I've already asked you this too, right? But the ability to reduce friction when you want to send a copy to an influencer
Right.
would be the main thing. Um, yeah, that would be it would be that or the ability to do smart cross linking outside of like into the front matter or the back matter. If I wanted to be able to um like it'd be nice to be able to say my main matter goes chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, but my back matter goes appendix A, appendix B, appendix C, right? And then
Yeah,
be
that's. Yeah, I think when it comes to the latter part, I think that that's in our queue.
yeah,
I would be surprised if it weren't. I'm quite sure that's in our queue because that just sounds like a very natural thing that would
yep,
kind of come next. I can't promise when it'll happen, but I'm quite sure that's in the queue. And when it comes to the reducing friction, so getting feedback, as you were already saying, is a really important part of the sort of process of self-publishing on Leanpub and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Being able to change things in response to feedback, and of course, a normal part of the publishing world or and like book marketing world is getting influencers a copy and stuff like that. The way we recommend doing it is creating a free coupon of your book for your
Right.
book, which means you send a link to somebody, and then they basically have to kind of buy the book for free on Leanpub before
Right.
they can download it. And you mentioned to me once in the past that you've had some relatively prominent influencer types who were like, "This is way too clunky and annoying for me to go through that. Like, can't you just send me a download link or something like that?"
I've got one more.
Okay.
If you want to hear it, you have time for one more?
Yep.
Okay. I love this idea. You may hate it. I'm just saying it anyway.
Okay.
I would love it if you guys, when you're generating content, like I don't care what happens if somebody uploads their PDF, right? But like I use the Markua. I would love it if when you generate a PDF or an EPUB, maybe you can't do it with EPUB, but a PDF at least, you salted it. So if you filled it with text that a human can't see, but an AI would see, that completely changes the meaning or turns it into gibberish as far as the AI is concerned. So that when people try to feed a book into AI,
Uh,
they get completely just, like the brown M&M thing, right? Where it's like if you ask them for their opinion and you get an answer back, there'll be like confirmation. They said something about brown M&Ms or whatever. So they fed this into an AI and the AI read it and it read it as text.
I think I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting suggestion. I think I was speaking for myself. The idea of trying to prevent that kind of thing from happening is like you kinda can't really prevent it. I mean, I
Yeah.
know you know that, like but, like, for example, like, it reminds me of a great video from years and years ago where someone was like, how you can, get around DRM on books,
Right.
and it had, that little bird that goes, "Bonk,"
Yeah.
and it was just hitting enter on a keyboard, but some guy had rigged it up to a camera that was taking a picture of the page change on the ebook on the screen. Um, and at the end, you've got a PDF made up of images of each page of and then you
Yeah.
write through OCR and stuff like that, right? So the idea of that, like but, like, I know what your point is to kind of, like, get it in there without the system knowing and have some kind of
I
redirect
really just want to annoy people who want
or punking or something,
yeah.
yeah.
Right. I just want to annoy someone who wants to use AI to skim a book. That's all I want.
Well,
That's why I said just throw some salt in there.
Yeah, on that note, I mean, I don't know if you're up on the latest news, but like basically from what my understanding is the latest place this whole issue is in the courts in the United States is, um, it's okay to upload books to your AI, but you have to
Mhm.
buy them. You can't use
Yeah.
pirated ones. And so
Yeah.
it looks like so some of these companies use databases of like millions of pirated books.
Right.
And it looks like there's a big class action suit going forward. By the way, IMO, based on my reading of t- you know, you know,
Yeah.
the news, that every single one of the authors of those millions of books may be kind of uh, able to demand thousands of dollars in compensation from each company that did it. So that's like billions and billions of dollars that they may have to send, and that's just like that's like just sending out the money. That's after fighting it in court and all the other costs and stuff like that. So it could be that at least one version of this fight is being won on the side of copyright and authors and things like that.
See, I'm not. It's not for me. It's a copyright thing at all.
Mm.
Like I just have such a small amount of trust in AI. I think people put way too much stock in it. I know you guys have an AI product and it sounds like it works really well, which is really cool, but it's also highly targeted
Yeah.
as as to what it does, right? It's not this general purpose.
So yeah, so that's thanks. So just very briefly to talk about that. So what we have is like kind of one way of thinking about it is content transformation services, right? So
Right.
you've written the book, it's your book, you've written it. We can translate it into other languages.
Yeah.
We can turn it into a course online, things like that. So we're not generating a book. We're taking the content you have and using AI to kind of turn it into something else. But
Right.
yeah, exactly. And there's all type.
Format or a different language. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
And that makes sense to me, but I think people have grown hyper reliant on AI on supposedly general AI or whatever you want to call it, right? These chat GPT things. I use them too, but I don't use them the way a lot of people use them. They use them to generate you ask someone for a review and what you get back is not a review written by them, but a review written by their AI that maybe they scanned, right? And I think there's a lot lost in that because the AIs aren't smart enough to comprehend. Like when someone did that, they had the AI read the book and generate a review, and they were able to turn around a review in very 45 minutes or something like that. But the review was not based on the book. The review was based on some weird s- model of a slice of the book that the AI had more or less randomly selected, and
Yeah.
I just don't have the faith in it that a lot of people do for the general purpose tasks they give it.
I'm totally with you there. I mean, on certain features, aspects of that, like an example I sort of have a group of friends across the country that we do a kind of Wednesday night, pub trivia night with on Zoom kind of thing.
Mhm.
We just rotate who's responsible for doing the quiz. And so I remember doing one with ChatGPT, and one of the sort of quiz things I like to do, like, is happened on what interesting thing happened on this day in history, and it's like, say multiple choice. And I mean, this is, this anecdotal blah, 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 but like just invented like a Muhammad Ali fight in like some year in London that like didn't really happen. And
Right.
that's a trivial example of just like the complete kind of made up stuff that,
Yeah. Just hallucinate stuff that
yeah,
it's yeah. So anyway,
yeah,
that's to each their own. And but I think that that hysteria will end, and then we'll realize that like every other cycle of AI,
yeah.
what we'll have is a suite of technologies. We'll have linguistic transformation technology. We'll have semantic search technology. That's what I use GPT for.
Mhm.
I don't have it write stuff for me, but if I've never been able to use a search engine effectively, but GPT, I can actually tell it what I want
You know what you mean?
and tell it, go find me the answer to this question. I don't want to hear you tell me. I want you to find me a link
Hmm.
to a site, and it could do it.
Yeah,
And so we'll have those kinds of tools.
exactly. Well, Max, thank you very much for taking some time out of the day to talk to me and to talk to all of us about your book, Ready: Why Most Software Projects Fail and How to Fix It. I really enjoyed our conversation, and yeah, thanks very much for using Leanpub as the platform. We really love just seeing authors like you and Luniel and books like yours show up on our site. It's just a great pleasure.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being out here.